Welcome to No More Desire, where we build a mindset and lifestyle for lasting recovery from porn. My name's Jake Castleman, and I'm excited to dive in with you. Let's get started, my friend.
I was introduced to porn when I was 12 years old by a friend. I had this weird experience I would call it a trauma experience. It was a trauma response. Porn started to become kind of my drug all throughout junior high and high school. But I was doing all of this secretly. Sometimes people think that when a person develops a full-blown porn or sex addiction, that it's like this gleeful journey into addiction. It's a lot more subtle than that. And by the time you realize that you are addicted, it's like there's a misery that comes with that. Because I'd been raised in the church and it was like, hey, marriage is that sanctioned relationship. I was just assuming, okay, all of this stuff in my past in terms of the sexual brokenness and all that, it's going to go away, the pornography, all of those things. And it didn't. Eventually, when she did leave, because I had those thoughts like she'd never leave, I now had to face reality. There's no reason that God should have met me with anything other than judgment. And yet, I was met with such kindness.
There's a pattern I see again and again when men try to overcome porn addiction. They believe the answer is discipline, and when they hear about grace, they ask, what does that even mean? For me, I remember how I felt so confused when people said, trust in Christ or live by grace. I often felt discouraged by this, feeling like others must have something figured out that I simply didn't. My recovery was based on more rules, more willpower, more pressure to finally get it right. I white-knuckled my way through another week, another month, and sometimes even another year. And yet something strange happened. The harder I tried, the more exhausted I became, and eventually I'd fall again. If you've experienced that cycle, you know how confusing it can feel. Part of you genuinely wants to live with integrity. Part of you wants to build a meaningful life, to be a man your family can trust, to feel proud of who you are. But then there are other parts driven by pain, loneliness, habit, or shame. These pull you back into behaviors you don't even want anymore. And what that creates inside of you is something I talk about often on this podcast. Divided life. One part of you reaching towards purpose and goodness, and another part stuck in patterns that feel impossible to break. For many men, the instinct is to fight harder. But what if discipline alone isn't actually the answer? What if real recovery requires something deeper? Today's guest has spent more than 2 decades helping men discover that deeper pain. Jonathan Daugherty is the founder of Be Broken Ministries, an organization that has helped thousands of men, wives, families, and churches walk through healing from sexual brokenness. He's the author of the book Grace-Based Recovery, the host of Pure Sex Radio, and someone who has spent over 20 years guiding men through a process of real transformation. But what makes Jonathan's voice so powerful isn't just his work, it's his story. Jonathan lived the double life that so many men know all too well. Pornography, secrecy, sexual addiction, and eventually infidelity that nearly destroyed his marriage. When everything finally came to light and his wife left, he found himself at rock bottom. And in that moment of brokenness, something unexpected happened. Instead of condemnation, he encountered grace. And that experience reshaped not only his recovery, but the entire framework he now teaches men around the world. In this conversation, Jonathan and I explore something that many recovery approaches miss. Why discipline alone cannot heal addiction. We talk about the difference between sobriety and transformation, the role of shame in keeping men stuck, how psychology and faith can work together in recovery, and why grace is not a free pass to keep living destructively, but actually the foundation that makes real change possible. If you've ever felt like you're trying harder than ever, but still stuck, if you've ever wondered why behavior change alone doesn't seem to bring real freedom, or if you're trying to rebuild your life, your integrity, and your relationships after addiction, this conversation is going to speak directly to you. Before we dive in, a reminder to follow and rate this podcast so that others looking for help can find it. and make sure to hit that notification button so that you can keep finding it. All right, let's get started. Jonathan, welcome. It's such a privilege. I think there's so many great things that you have to share with guys, so much hope that you have to offer, and so many messages that are just very, very important for them to hear, especially these days. So I want to start off by helping people get to know you. Tell men a bit about your story, your personal journey, and all the way up to what you do for men and families now.
Yeah, sure. So I actually grew up most of my childhood in Central Texas in a Christian home. So I would say that my childhood overall was kind of idyllic in the sense that I had a mother and father that genuinely loved each other. I had a mother and father who loved me and my sister very well. They also loved Jesus, and it was genuine. So there was a sense of authenticity that I was able to grow up in, where I didn't see a lot of this is how my parents acted out there, and then at home they were completely different. And yet, ironically, I learned how to live a double life. So in some ways, I like to let people know that I think as human beings, we have built-in brokenness. So it doesn't have to come like from our parents, or it doesn't have to come. It's like, hey, I got enough of my own brokenness that it was like I learned how to do some of these things on my own. That being said, I also don't want to make it sound like my parents were perfect and sinless and no problems there. But in terms of what I eventually got entangled in terms of my sexual sin, that wasn't part of their story. But I was introduced to porn when I was 12 years old by a friend. And man, I was not expecting to see porn. And so it kind of shocked me. And when he introduced that to me, it was like I had this weird experience I would call it a trauma experience. It was a trauma response because it was overwhelming to me. And simultaneously, I was feeling a sense of almost like nausea and guilt. But at the same time, I was like, man, something is appealing to this. Like I feel an electricity in my body that I've never felt before. And so porn started to become kind of my drug all throughout junior high and high school. When he introduced it to me at 12, I started kind of going down that path, but I was doing all of this secretly. It wasn't like I went home and said, Mom, Dad, guess what I saw today?
Right.
And that's where the reason that didn't happen is because there were some disconnects between me and my parents in the sense that they had never told me about porn. They had never had any of these conversations with me. And I think part of it was because that was not part of their personal story. Another part of it was the generations that they grew up in, that I think there were just certain things that were like topics that were either difficult, embarrassing, fearful, whatever, that you just don't talk about it, right? So I picked up on that and it was like, okay, I just saw porn. I'm not going to go tell my parents. But man, I may not have told them about porn, but porn was certainly calling to me. And throughout junior high and high school, this became kind of my secret drug. And Jake, this is really where I started to kind of learn how to construct a divided life. It was like I was learning how to keep secrets. At the same time, not only just keep those secrets, but also build an image that others would see of me, kind of just a facade that, okay, I'm going to make sure that in order to keep this secret, I'm going to make sure that people see me as the athlete, the churchgoer, the good guy. And I did pretty good at that. And then I got into college and it wasn't just about porn anymore. Now I was actually crossing what we call the flesh barrier and I'm actually being sexual with other people. And this was a real hit to my own personal faith because again, I'd grown up in this Christian home and I knew at the very least where God had drawn the lines around sex being marriage. And so here I was now, I'm doing something that it's not just against the law of my faith, it was against the law of my own conscience because I believed, in my Christian faith. And it was like, wow, now I'm not even living up to my own standards of what I believe. So I like to say that because sometimes people think that when a person develops a full-blown porn or sex addiction, that it's like this gleeful journey into addiction. Like somehow by the time you're a porn or sex addict, you've so chosen that path that you're like, I'm so happy that I'm completely addicted to sex. And it's like, it's a lot more subtle than that. And by the time you realize that you are addicted, it's like there's a misery that comes with that. And so already in college, I was starting to feel kind of the weight of that misery of living this double life. And then I thought, because I'd been raised in the church and it was like, hey, marriage is that sanctioned relationship. I ended up getting married and I was just assuming, okay, all of this stuff in my past in terms of the sexual brokenness and all that, it's going to go away, the pornography, all of those things. And it didn't, which I was not only a little bit surprised by, but I was severely disappointed by that because I just thought, man, I kind of wanted this ring on my finger to be sort of like Lord of the Rings. Like, you put this ring on your finger and like magic happens, certain things just disappear and become invisible. And it was like, no, it doesn't really work that way.
The one ring.
In fact, what I would say is,
yes,
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
What I would say is when I actually got married, it only magnified some of those issues in my life. And yet I wasn't ready to actually deal with them because I didn't bring all of my secrets, or I didn't share all of my secrets with my wife. And so there were still some things. I got back into some porn, eventually got a computer, got on the internet. This is back in the mid 90s. So this is dating myself. And then eventually started using the internet to set up offline encounters. So it wasn't just about pornography anymore, even in my marriage. Now I'm actually being unfaithful with other people. This all came to a head in the summer of 1999, and everything came out. And there's more than I can share here, but basically the short story is that when everything came out, my wife eventually left. And she had no idea that her leaving would be the catalyst for me actually finally being broken over my addiction and actually being ready to not only really receive God's grace and forgiveness, but to actually start intentionally investing in recovery and actually going into a recovery journey. And I think the reason that her leaving was a catalyst was because I'd kind of always pictured her as the strong one in a relationship, which was absolutely true. But I always kind of thought, well, that means she'll never leave. Like I'll always be able to be attached to her no matter what I do. And which is real foolish, again, self-centered thinking that is like, yeah, I can be unfaithful. I can be this colossal jerk and sex addict and think somehow that she's just going to stick around. It's like, that's the pinnacle of foolish thinking. Eventually, when she did leave, because I had those thoughts like she'd never leave, I now had to face reality. And when I faced reality, it was very ugly. In fact, that season of my life, I was actually suicidal. Found out later I was clinically depressed, went on some medication just to help that as part of my recovery. But I started my recovery journey then, and God really met me in a very profound and personal way, literally the day that my wife left, which is why we're going to talk about this is I absolutely believe that all of recovery is founded on a grace foundation. Like everything that we do in our ministry, everything that was part of my recovery really had a grace foundation to it, because there's no reason that God should have met me with anything other than judgment and, the hellfire of damnation in that moment. And yet I was met with such kindness. In fact, I would say that, it was as if God just crawled up next to me on the floor without a Bible verse, without some kind of condemnation or anything like that, but just like, I'm here. And I mean, it was palpable. It was tangible. I could feel that he was with me. And I thought, okay, maybe a different way of living is possible, because if God will meet me here, then maybe he's got something better for me. And so that started kind of the exploration of recovery. I got connected with a great counselor, started getting into some groups, and I started realizing that there is community out there. There is a tribe of men who are willing to say, yeah, me too. And I let me tell you my story. Why don't you tell me yours? And I remember the first time I stepped into a support group where I was asked to share my story, about had a panic attack, first of all, because I thought, I've never told anybody this. And here's a bunch of guys looking at me. And I told them, and nobody freaked out. Nobody spontaneously combusted. It was like, and then they reached out and they were like, you belong here. This is exactly where you need to be. And I thought, it was like, this huge exhale of all the stress and all the shame and all the lies that you're too broken, you're too gone. There's no possible way that, Jonathan, all the things that you've done, not only do you deserve to not have recovery, you deserve to be in jail. Because there were some things that I did that were illegal as part of my, like prostitutes and things like that were part of my story. So I get on this recovery journey. My wife was actually getting some healing care that I didn't even know about, because when she left, she said, I don't want to see you or speak to you ever again. And so it was almost as if God was saying, let me get her to a safe place and I can take care of her. And Jonathan, I need you to just be 100% totally focused on your recovery. And that's really what happened. And I tell guys to this day that if recovery is really going to be genuine in your life, it has to be between only three people. It has to be between you and who's looking back at you in the mirror and God. It's like your motivation has to be that. If you have anything else, I'm going to do this because I want to save my marriage. I'm going to do this because I want my kids or my reputation or my job back, or what. It's like all of those other things eventually will not sustain long-term recovery. I think it's like every day you got to look in the mirror and go, who are you going to be today? And it's got to be between you and God and that person in the mirror. And thankfully, God in his grace and mercy said, I'm going to force you into that position. I'm going to make sure everyone is out of your life so that that's all that you can focus on. And after 9 months of separation, only by, again, the grace and miracle of God, my marriage was actually reconciled and we were restored. And last year, we actually celebrated our 30th anniversary. And we also have 3 adult children that came after we got back together. So it's really even a miracle that they exist. And then just last year, we had our first granddaughter. So it's just been really cool to see how God's grace was not just about me getting free from, addiction, but it's like he has a lot of blessings on that journey as well. And I want to say that those are particulars to my story. I'm not saying that's the standard that happens in every single person's recovery, that, oh, your marriage will be saved, you'll have children. That's not the point. The point is that I want to say that there's good things that I would have never recognized or been able to appreciate if I had not gone through this recovery journey. And then out of that, about 4 years into my recovery, God really called me into full-time ministry with just 3 words. He said, I want you to tell your story. And I fought that for a while, for almost a year, because I was like, wait a second. I thought the whole point of recovery was getting away from my past, get away from all that stuff. And I was reminded in that journey and in that process of how God's grace is not just about kindness. It's about remaking us into a completely different person. And part of that means he can take all this brokenness, all this ugliness, and say, what you meant for evil or for bad, I'm going to turn it and I'm going to use it for good. And that's really how Be Broken Ministries got started in 2003. And so for the last 23 years, I've been telling my story in hopes of trying to build a bridge, especially for other men, to be able to feel safe enough then to come into a recovery community and say, okay, here's my story. I guess I'll start this journey as well. Because, hey, if a knucklehead and jerk like Jonathan can somehow be different than how he was, then maybe there's hope for me to actually, deal with my own addiction and not have to stay in the shame cycle and in the addictive pattern anymore. So that's, believe it or not, even though that took a while, that's the thumbnail sketch of my life and story and ministry.
It's a beautiful story, man. It really is. And it's deeply inspired. There's, if I'm looking down, it's because I'm writing down notes, not texting on my phone or scrolling social media or something like that. So I took multiple notes here, and one of the things that you said that struck me is this kind of this feeling you had when you were living this double life of, I think you said the law of my conscience. I believe that's how you put that. Um, Going against that. I teach men integration and coherence, right, when it comes to their psychology and their nervous system. And um, if every part of you can't agree with something, then it's not according to truth and it's not according to love. And those things are of God, right? So whether you want to bring it back to religion and spirituality or down to neuroscience, I think it all comes back to the same truths. And we know that inside. I think we carry that truth inside of us. And when it comes to something like addiction, some parts of us say it's a total waste of my time and potential, and other parts of us say, I want to be a great person and live this very meaningful life. This is not serving that. Other parts of us say, I want this. I'm excited about this. Oh my gosh, I'm indulging in it. And other parts of us are just in terror and horror at what's happening. So this is not integrated. It's not coherent. It's not whole. I think God stands for holiness or wholeness. Right? That's what He's all about. So such a good reflection. And one of the things that you mentioned, and we often talk about this with rock bottom experiences, is this brokenness that we all carry. Then also, when your wife left, and blessedly she came back eventually after 9 months, which is interesting. I don't know if you think of that as a rebirth process. It's like you reborn,
exactly.
right? In 9 months. So fitting. But why do you think it requires this brokenness, this recognition of brokenness to finally take that step for people?
Yeah, I think, again, for me, it comes back to grace, because the only way that I can actually receive grace, not even just from God, but from anyone, is it requires humility.
Mm-hmm.
And there's an aspect to humility that is a brokenness. Getting back to when I mentioned about kind of the law of my own conscience, I had to realize, forget about living up to God's standards. I'm a billion miles away from that. I can't even live up to my own. And so I realized it's going to be a requirement that I receive grace from a power greater than me if I'm ever going to be transformed and changed. And so the idea of getting to a place where I have to admit, I am powerless. I have tried. I've tried in my own ways, my own wisdom. And it's like, to your point, there's such incongruity in my thoughts, my spirit, my will, all of that it's like, I am broken. And so if I'm going to get help, if I'm going to receive grace from another person or from God, I'm going to have to admit, hey, Jake, I don't know what I'm doing. Can you help me? And there's a humility in that says, I'm admitting my brokenness. I'm admitting my struggle. I'm admitting my addiction. And if I keep trying to, quote unquote, figure it out on my own, I won't have that brokenness. I won't have that humility that's necessary in order to step into authentic recovery community or into an authentic transformation, journey. And so it's a requirement. You can't, if a person is trying to say, I can sort of keep control on my life while simultaneously saying, I'm going to be fully invested in recovery, it's like, I'm sorry, those things are at odds. To your point, there's an incongruity there. I'm going to mentally say that I'm totally in with recovery, but in my will, I'm going to say, I'm still going to control every single, I'm going to control what people know about me. I'm going to control, the degree to which I confess my sins or confess my brokenness. It's like, it won't work.
Yes. I think that very much is this integration. For me, again, I like to integrate philosophies and truths from multiple areas. For instance, the Eastern and Western traditions. We say surrender, right? In Christianity, surrender all my emotions, all my thoughts, everything that I am to Jesus Christ, right? And then in Buddhism, they say it's all mindfulness and self-awareness. Essentially, everything that comes in, I allow it, I welcome it. It's okay for it to be here. I'm not going to resist or fight any of it. And that's very much a surrender process. And I think of this when you talk about grace, a lot of men hear grace and they assume it means They assume it means lowering standards or excusing behavior. You've definitely described it a different way. How do you define grace in a way that actually produces change rather than avoiding change?
Yeah. Grace is more about a value statement than it is about like, oh, just keep living however you want. What I mean by that is it's a value statement because it's essentially God saying, I know everything about you. I know the ways in which you failed, even your own conscience. And yet I'm still going to choose to want you, to love you, to care for you. That's grace. Grace, by definition, is undeserved or unearned kindness or favor. So if you think about it, there's already a standard built into grace. You can't have grace if there's not a standard, because how can you have words like undeserved or unearned? It's like
Right.
there's a standard there. So when essentially what grace is saying is when you haven't met the standard, when you have broken the law, so to speak, grace is going to come in and say, I'm going to give you something that you don't deserve because you have broken that standard. And that's where it's a value statement, because what God is saying is your life is worth my attention and my care, even when you have broken the standard. When we think of grace only as like a pass, like, oh, you know what? Grace is just saying, forget about it. It's like, well, then we don't understand that grace is attached to a standard. I think grace is much more powerful when we realize that I know the degree to which I have actually broken the standard, and yet still there is love, there is kindness, there is care that is being shown to me, because there is someone, God, or maybe even another person in your life that says, I value you even above whether or not you are keeping the standard perfectly. And I mean, that started to blow my mind when I got into recovery. I mean, I'd grown up in the church, and yet I didn't really start to understand grace until I got into recovery.
Hmm.
And by the way, that's been true for a lot of men that we've seen over the years that we've helped. They've been, church goers or whatever for most of their life. And then they really start to understand grace when they get into recovery, because they start to get into a community of other brothers who say, hey, listen, you belong here. Don't hide anything. Don't lie about your failures this last week. We're on a growth mission together. It's safe enough here to tell your full story. And it's like, what is that? That's grace, because that's other men that are saying your life and your recovery is worth more than whether or not you have failed this week. And it shifts the focus, because then you start realizing, oh, I don't have to be so focused on where's the line of how, whether or not I'm going to fail this week, because instead I start to live more from that value proposition of my life is worth more than this law, more than this, rule. And so why don't I start then living as someone whose life is more valuable than that? And sometimes when guys keep their recovery only at like the not acting out, measurement, they're not going to really experience transformation. They're not going to experience that grace, the fullness of like the value of their life. They're going to just still see their value only as whether or not I've acted out this week. And my goodness, Jake, our lives are worth way more than whether or not we've acted out this week. I mean, we have tremendous value. God proved that when Christ went to the cross, because he's saying that's how much your life is actually worth to me. And so there's a sense in which that's what grace means to me. And that's what we try to teach in our ministry, is it's more of a value statement than it is about whether or not you can just keep doing what you're doing and just be like, it doesn't matter because, quote unquote, God forgives or God gives me grace. I would hope we can start recognizing our value from that grace, that then we go, oh, I'm made for things that are way better than anything addiction could offer. I'm even made for things that are way better than anything recovery could offer. And so it starts to put things, I think, in perspective overall.
Yes, I agree. It takes me to IFS and parts work as well, and how guys will have these experiences when they go into their, I call it the emotional mind. It's called by all sorts of names, but essentially going into the unconscious and realizing these belief systems and these burdens that we carry. And, they get in touch with, once they dig through all that, we always inevitably find at the core, at the center, there is this grace that you're talking about. There's this unconditional love, this calmness in the center that says, I love you and I'm here for you. I understand you. And whatever we bring forward into that, any kind of the cravings and the confusion and the fear and the shame and all of it. There's just this boundless space open for all of those feelings to come into. And there is no bounds to that. There's no bounds.
Now, I think it is important to say here that this is, and this might sound weird, especially when guys are thinking about all the many ways in which they've acted out and hurt other people and how their addiction has just sort of controlled their life. I will say this that we're talking about right now is actually the most difficult part of recovery. Because the easy part, if I can put it, I'll put it in air quotes, the easy part is understanding like where the behavioral lines are in addiction. It's like, okay, I've done this behavior. I don't want to do that. And the harder thing, getting back to your idea of kind of congruity among our entire self, is that we can be talking about this right now, and there can be a lot of guys listening or watching this that are going, there's a mental assent to what we're saying. Like
Right.
cognitively, they go,
Yes.
oh, I totally understand. I get it. My value is of, infinite worth and all this kind of stuff.
Right.
But where their emotions and even their will and some of these, their spirit even, where those things are, it's like there's a complete rejection of that because there's such deep woven shame lies that are down in the soul that this is where the hardest work comes, because you have a guy that's still going to perform in recovery as if his worth is based on his performance.
Yes.
Even no matter how many times we say to him, no, it's grace. Your value is a consistent. It's a constant. It doesn't fluctuate whether or not you've done poorly or well this week. That can take years for a guy to really embrace that at the soul level. So I just want to say that because I don't want anybody to be hearing or watching this and thinking that, hey, listen, just flip a switch. All of a sudden grace will make sense and it'll be down deep in your soul. It took me years. And you know what? It's still a struggle that I have today of really believing do I believe the value statement that God has made about me? That's totally by grace, not based on how well I did today, but the fact that just because I'm a human being made in God's image, that I have infinite worth and value, and that's why he cares for me. That's why he loves me. And I can receive that from other people who have that same disposition. So I just want to say that so that nobody thinks that this is going to be some kind of easy little flip the switch and it'll all make sense.
Yeah.
But it's worth going on that journey to understand this definition of grace in order for there to be a much fuller richness to your recovery experience rather than just behavior modification.
Yes. And I say that healing is an emotional process, not a mental one. You could also say it's a spiritual process, not a conceptual one, right? We can't just say, okay, as you say, I know grace exists. I know God loves me unconditionally. Therefore, okay, now I can be sober. Why am I not sober, right? Why is this not happening? And it's because it has to be experiential. It has to be experienced. And that takes time. It takes practice. It takes me going through different things that are difficult and painful. I think that for me, I always say grace, again, that truth, that love, that grace that's at the core of all of it is underneath all the burdens and the pains that we carry. And so we have to take time breaking open our heart, right? To actually delve into, okay, what are all the things that I feel? And I had this experience where I got angry. Well, part of me is judging me for that and saying I'm a terrible person because I got angry. And then there's the angry part that's filled with rage and vengeance. And then there's this kid in me that's just like, I can't believe this terrible thing that I did. And I hurt this person. And I just feel like I'm so bad. And it's all those burdens and all that self-judgment and all those things. If I can clear through all that, move through all that, then often what we see is we breathe into what's underneath all of it. And it's like, there's the grace. There's God.
And
There's that higher self.
And honestly, Jake, I think that's where there's a real dovetail between, the spiritual and maybe in the theological side and the psychology of this. Because I think a lot of times what people want to do is keep those in separate camps.
Yeah.
And the reality is I'm telling my Christian friends all the time, listen, don't freak out about psychology. I mean, all the ologies are just the study of whatever is the prefix. So it's like, biology, the ologies are okay. It's just the study of that. So psychology is the study of the mind. Like, how does the mind work? How do we think and process? And so it's important when you think about where patterns started, they're always going to have started in childhood. I'm not saying that we can't develop certain patterns later on, but the core ones, the ones that are probably most deeply rooted in whatever our brokenness is, whatever our, especially if we've developed an addiction, those things are going to have patterns that were rooted in our childhood. And this is where psychology can help us tremendously. And it's not opposed to our theology. Generally speaking, like if people are honestly doing good work in psychology, they're going to recognize that so much of what they're finding only confirms spiritual truths and principles, proverbs, different kinds of things that and so it's like, hey, get a good counselor that really knows how to understand some of those patterns, because there can be blockages. Like even we were saying a minute ago, this idea of understanding grace at the deep level is probably the hardest thing. It's because there's a lot of patterns psychologically that prevent us from thinking these things. I mean, for how many years does a person have to think, I am worthless, before that is an identity statement? Like, that's not just, hey, I had this thought at one point in time because somebody told me. No, it's like, it's woven into their soul. I am worthless. And here we come along, Jake, and we say, guess what? You're beloved. Like, I mean, you're just intrinsically worth, an infinite value. It's like, you're not going to just flip that. It's like, no, you've got years, decades of this shame identity statement, and it's going to take some counseling. It might take some different techniques of trying to kind of open up your brain in certain ways to be able to repattern and refocus and heal. And so all of that, I think, is useful in the recovery space, and it's not antithetical to a Christian faith. In fact, I think it only confirms the idea of, Romans 12:2 talks about being transformed by the renewal of our minds. Mm-hmm. Well, guess what? I think psychology can help us in that spiritual transformation of our minds.
Yes. And in fact, principles like confession, right? I mean, what do we do when we go to therapy, or when we journal, or when we emotionally regulate and we work through emotions? We're using principles of confession. I bring forward everything I feel and what it's like and how it is and all of that. And I have someone there, right, in a room that's offering non-judgment, their openness, listening, questions. We don't have to do that with a professional. They can teach us how to do that. So it's extremely helpful. But we can also do that on our own, right? And with God, we can do that in our closet. We can do that writing down. We can do it in prayer. We can do it in meditation. This is confession, right? I think there's a reason that God teaches us that to us. And then he teaches us forgiveness, which is to give away. So if I can confess and bring forward all the garbage and the beliefs and all the pain and everything, then eventually I can forgive myself. I can receive God's gift of forgiveness. It is, you carry all this pain and I'm here to free you of it, but you have to bring it forward, set it on the altar and offer it up. You have to do that. And then we can, as you say, our mind can be renewed, right? That's another, it's one of the definitions for repentance, I believe, renewal of the mind. So now I can change, right? I can repent, I can change because I've cleared that way. And through God's grace, that way has been cleared, right? So it's all interlinked. It's not, as you say, I agree 100%. Psychology and spirituality, religion, they all interconnect, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, one of the words that we use most often in our ministry when we're talking about a man's recovery journey from sexual brokenness is we use this word integrity, which it has the idea of being integrated.
Yes.
And if you think about addiction, disintegrates us. I mentioned earlier about even on my own story. What did I do? I learned how to live a double life. I was disintegrated. Yep. I had this whole part of my life that was completely secret and hidden, and this other part that I would present, which was actually phony. It wasn't really the full me. And so what recovery tries to do, and really I think what God's grace invites us into, is saying, bring everything into the light, because I want you to be an integrated person. I want you to be, listen, your character, your demeanor, your speech, your whatever is not fractured based on where you are. It's like whether you're at home, you're at work, you're at church, you're in the community, you're in the grocery store, you are an integrated whole person wherever you are. And let me tell you, I just want to give this little kind of nugget of hope. I like to get ahead sometimes, is there is such peace in living as an integrated person. And so I just want to put that out there for the guys that are listening and hearing, and they can totally identify with maybe they're in a state where they're disintegrated right now. I understand the weight of that, just the agony, the chaos. There's such confusion in living a disintegrated life. And there's such stress there too, because how many times do you have to go, okay, listen, I know I lied to this person over here, but they know that person. And what did I tell this person? I mean, it is just so chaotic and stressful. And when there's integration where you're saying, I'm not carrying any lies anymore, I'm not carrying any secrets. There's I'm not saying it's without difficulty.
Sure.
I mean, life in its best form is going to have difficulties, but there's still a peace that's there because I'm not trying to fool anybody. I'm not trying to hide from anyone. And so I just want to give that hope there that integrity is a life of peace, rest, and joy.
Yes. And I think I love that, both the symbolism and kind of the psychological and the spiritual end of that integration, that integrity that you're talking about. It's when I can trust every part of me and every part of me can trust me, if that makes sense. We're thinking of ourselves in sub-personalities there, right, that make up us, but that self-trust is everything. And so my wife can trust me, my kids can trust me, my friends can trust me, my neighbors can trust me, but what I drive home, what I think is so important and what's been so meaningful for me is, can I trust myself? Like, can I feel within myself, I do feel I'm a good person. Like, I do feel like, I'm happy about who I am and I don't have all this stuff to hide. That right there is the peace of God. That's what God wants for us, I think,
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely.
Yeah. So one of the things that I thought about, as you were talking about this concept of worthlessness that we can carry around, I think for me, for so much of my life, it wasn't until my almost mid-20s that I started to learn about shame. Maybe a little earlier, early 20s. I started to learn about shame. I started to learn about vulnerability. Brene Brown, her works were the first that I was introduced to, as is the case for quite a few people these days. We're introduced to that from her, people of my generation, I should say. And what I came to understand is I had so many unconscious beliefs of shame. I was so out of touch with my emotions and my own internal dialogue. It wasn't dialogue. It was just this feeling I carried around with myself all the time. I'm not worthy of happiness. I'm not a good person. I can't do great things. I don't believe in myself. That's just how I felt. I just grew up feeling that way, And I think there's so much, as you say, this brokenness that we carry. Like, my parents were good people. They did their very best, right? They had their flaws and, like you say, their sins and different things. But there's so much I carried from just a very young age of that brokenness, and putting it into words eventually and bringing that out then enabled me to bring that kind of darkness into the light and start to work through it. So many men are deeply ashamed, right, at their core, right? Not just of what they've done, but who they believe that they are. And how does grace reshape a man's sense of worth and identity in recovery? We've been talking about this, but maybe you have a little more to say on how that reshapes that sense.
Yeah, I'll say two things. One is kind of how we tend to form a lot of those, what we call shame lies or shame identity statements, and then how grace, addresses that. I think, especially for those of us who live in the Western world, I don't know, where all of your listeners and viewers are, but so much of just the dynamic of the Western world, I think this is true worldwide, but it's really magnified in, Europe and the United States, is this idea that your worth is based on your performance. I mean, it is just everywhere that you look.
Right.
I mean,
Yes.
everything is on a scale of how well did you meet the mark, whatever it may be. And that's so like ubiquitous and just ingrained in us from every angle of our lives that it's very easy then to kind of come up with a lot of the different shame identity statements that we have, because we'll go, well, I didn't meet the mark. I mean, one of my core shame lies was I've got to be perfect.
Right.
Like,
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
Well, and how quickly do you then start having to hide who you really are? Because I mean, I'm not perfect. And yet that's why the image building, what we call like creating that facade, you're not creating an image that's flawed. You're saying, no, it's got to be a perfect image. So that creates its own stress of its own. Now I got to keep working on presenting myself as somebody who doesn't make mistakes, who's never wrong, whatever. And so
Yes.
that performance metric is so strong that's, I think, where a lot of those shame lies come from.
Yes.
So then the way grace addresses that, and this is why it's such a difficult thing, is because grace is trying to come in and remind us your life, even your very existence, is a gift to you. Like, you didn't create yourself.
Yep.
You had nothing to do with your birth. You had nothing to do with anything. And it's like, so even there in just your ontology, just your being, God is basically saying to you, you are a gift.
Mm-hmm.
So your very existence is grace, not only to you, but just to creation. Like God said, I wanted you to exist. Just out of my sheer love for you, I wanted you to exist. And so if we can start from that point and say, okay, I had nothing to do with my birth. I had nothing to do with my existence. That means that God is the one that thought it was worth me being alive, like me existing. So right there, already grace is saying your life is a gift. You didn't earn it. You didn't do anything to create yourself. If we can then start kind of taking that a little bit further to the fullness of what that means in an identity statement, what that means is that from God's perspective, your life is worth his gaze, his attention, because your life already started in his mind. Like, hey, Jake needs to exist. I mean, I've already determined he needs to exist. And because you exist, he's saying, you're worth me looking at every single day. You're worth me paying attention to every single day. You are worth my attention every single day. And you didn't do anything to earn that. So that's where I think grace starts to then combat the idea that your value is on a performance scale. And again, while these concepts intellectually may be somewhat easy to grasp, we do have to admit it takes a long time. Likely, I would say it's a lifelong journey of having that really get down deep. But the more it can actually travel down into your soul, not where you're looking in the mirror in any kind of arrogant way, because again, what? Your life was a gift. You didn't earn it. So we don't look in the mirror and say, I'm awesome, I'm great, I'm wonderful, as if I created my wonder and my beauty and my amazement. No, it's like I can look in the mirror, and if I'm saying, I'm wonderful and I'm valuable, I'm saying that because I recognize I'm a gift. Like that life was a gift. And so I'm saying those things with at its base, an attitude of thanksgiving. So when I can look at myself and say, wow, I'm worth being alive. I'm worth existing. Not because I'm great, but because God said so. Like he said, you're worth being alive. Then the way this practically starts working in recovery, you and I both know this, Jake, the more a person will start to garner a genuine mindset and attitude of gratefulness, their recovery accelerates exponentially. If we are again thinking that our recovery and our worth is based on performance, we're going to constantly even be stressed about how we're doing on our, acting out. But if we start to realize my life is a gift, my identity, my value is intrinsic, I don't have to stay on the performance yo-yo anymore. Gratitude will start to build. And the more grateful I become, the more I start looking at everything in my life through the lens of gratitude. I'm going to be more joyful going to my weekly support group because it's not going to be about, hey, how can I leech off of them so that I don't act out? I'm going to be more grateful going to my counselor because it's like, there is some brokenness in my thinking and I want to learn more about what I need to do. There's going to be more gratefulness in any relationship that you can continue to build, especially with those who are willing to forgive you for the ways that you've hurt them. Gratitude starts to grow. And all of that, I believe, is founded on grace and your understanding that your value was established by grace and not your performance. So a little bit of a long answer, but I don't know if that kind of makes sense for just how grace practically helps us combat those shame lies.
Yes, I think it's so powerful. I think I see gratitude and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this, but gratitude it's a form of love, right? It's love and gratitude they're so intertwined. And when I can approach life with gratitude, I'm motivated. I feel purposeful. I want to live a good life. I want to do great things. We often, egoically, we perceive it as, well, I will perform, I will do great things, and then I'll feel like a good person, and then I'll finally feel like enough. And it's the opposite. We have to flip that around entirely on its head and say, no, I see the worth inside of me of like, as you say, my existence is a gift. Everything that I can do is a gift. Every single good I can do out in the world is a gift. Now I'm motivated to go about doing that good. So the love and the gratitude comes first, and then the positive actions come after. But in our culture, we flip that around.
Yeah, and I think it's important to recognize that everything about our addiction was built on a self-centeredness.
Right.
You can build an addiction all on your own. Like, you don't need anyone else to build an addiction. All you need is yourself and your own desires out of control.
Mm,
But guess what you need to be grateful? You need relationship. The very
mm.
act of gratitude is relational, because what does it require, Jake? It means me saying, thank you.
Thank you.
Like,
Right.
I have to go outside of myself to have gratitude. So
Mm,
even at a very foundational level, the reason that gratitude is so important to recovery, not as like a formula or anything, but because it's changing your heart, is you are shifting the paradigm from a very self-centered, I can do this all on my own and I will do it all on my own, to saying, I need others, and I can actually, I appreciate others who are in my life. I appreciate God in my life. I appreciate my brothers in recovery. I appreciate my family. And gratitude shifts the paradigm from being totally self-focused to saying, I actually am living a life in community. And gratitude only helps that to kind of flourish and grow, because by definition, gratitude requires relationship. You can't internalize gratitude in the sense of like somehow, quote unquote, thanking yourself. You're like, no, I have to recognize the gift of my life, the goodness of my life. All of that it's from outside of me, not something from it within.
yes. And one of the things that I find beautiful to contemplate, because I'm somebody that, I've studied different faiths and religions. I find beauty in each of them. And, in Buddhism, they say you come from everything, right? Everything that I am comes from everything else. So I can't take credit for anything that I am. And we're saying that as well in Christianity with God. And I don't think that those are different things. I think that they're interconnected, because we believe in God. We believe He's the creator. He's created everything. Therefore, we've come from all that creation. And I think that one of the places that I got tripped up for years, and many of the guys that I've spoken to get tripped up as well, is, well, okay, so if I'm a gift and I'm supposed to be grateful for everything that I am, and that I have all this intrinsic worth and I'm just enough, then what reason is there for me to do anything? And we've talked about some of that, right? That the going about doing great things comes from the gratitude. But one of the things that cleared it up for me, and I can't remember where I first heard this, but God gave me the gift and I cultivate the gift. It's up to me to take the responsibility to grow what I have, right? And there's parables for that, right? The parable of the
Oh, yeah.
talents. But that doesn't negate the original gifting, right? Without the original gifting, there's nothing to cultivate. And I think that's one of the secrets to happiness, I think.
Yeah. And I would say this, it's a gift that has a purpose that is not only valuable and good for you, but ultimately it's also good for others. I go back to this idea that, in the scriptures, we're told that God is love. So like,
Yeah.
that's just part of he can't help it. Like, he's
Yeah.
just, in fact, I believe that was the impetus for creation at all, was just like this idea of just from God's own being, just this outpouring of, I want to be creative. I want to share, who I
Yeah.
am.
Love that.
And
Yeah.
so the idea is us being made in his image. The gift of life, the gift of your existence is not just for your own good. The idea of, wow, I get to enjoy all of this creation. but it's meant to be like, and you are to reflect that love of God. You're actually to multiply that love of God. And so therefore, I look at when I'm talking to guys about recovery, and they always want to know, like, what's the goal? What, how, and also how long will this take? That's usually the question they ask. Is I like to say, actually the goal is an abundant life of love. Like, and they go, wait, that has nothing to do with my acting out. I was, exactly. It's like
Right.
recovery is not meant to be an end in itself. Like, and so many times they're looking at it as like, and this is why sometimes I think guys get a little bit discouraged in recovery, is because they've made recovery the goal. Like if I just stop acting out, that's the goal. And I'm like, no, you're made for more, because of what we're talking about here. As gratitude builds, as grace reminds you of your value and your worth, you realize that you actually have a purpose that goes beyond just your own sobriety, your own character, your own quote unquote goodness. It's like, man, it's supposed to be shared. In fact, the Bible also talks about how Jesus himself said it's better to give than to receive.
Yeah.
So there's a different kind of economy in the way that God has made us, where, again, we're in a consumeristic society. Everything's based on performance and all that. And so we're used to being trained on, how do I take so I can have more?
Yep.
And what I learned through recovery was, wow, it's how can I be whole so that I can actually give to others? How can I be healthy and well enough so that I have something of value to share to others? And let me tell you, there is a different economy of joy that happens when we're willing to give away all the good things that we received in our recovery, because there's nothing like seeing another man's face light up when there's an insight or there's a breakthrough or there's healing. You go, wow, I got to witness that. And so your joy is multiplied, not just because you're sober, but because you're able to share your sobriety and what you've learned with somebody else and see them wake up to a whole new way of living. And you go, wow, that's 10 times better than just my own purity and sobriety.
Yes. And when we participate in other people's healing, we heal inside. Like you say, it's not based on kind of this very brain logic way of thinking. It's as you say, a totally different economy, a completely different type of logic, and goes beyond our finite understanding here. One of the things that I thought about, a story for me that was very meaningful, an experience I had was, several months ago, I was at a retreat and learning about recovery and having my own experiences with it and things. It was extremely powerful. And one of the phrases that was said there is, "I am God's beloved son, and in me he is well pleased." And I've been doing parts work in IFS, and I do it. It's my bread and butter. I do it every day. I've been doing it for years, and so I was getting in touch with that belief, right, and focusing on that. And I've talked about this on the podcast before, so I'll be a broken record for some people. But I was contemplating that and journaling about it in the morning, and I was doing what we talked about, which is, do I believe this conceptually and mentally, or do I really feel it? Do I really believe it at my core? And I found barriers there to that belief. And so I started to just welcome them forward. And part of me said, what have I done to earn that? Why am I so special that I would be a beloved son? Why would God love me? What have I done to earn that love? And so I listened to that part of me and listened to this burdened belief and allowed that part time to speak, and appreciated that it was trying to earn my worth and trying to bring me feelings of worthiness in my life through its own egoic methods, and appreciating where it's coming from and getting down deep into some of the fears and the feelings of shame and all that, and just working through it, over probably 20 minutes. And I came to just this coherence and this feeling of, why does God love me like that? Just because it's who he is. And very distinctly, I felt, because I want you to share it with others. That's it. I just love you, and I just want you to share it with other people. That's all.
And sometimes that's really hard for people to receive, but it's one of those things. I like the fact that you said you sat in it for a good while. Because, there have been a lot of guys in our ministry, and I'm sure you've encountered them, that they've maybe been part of church or religion growing up, and they've heard God loves you.
Mhm.
And there's a sense in which guys they'll just sort of jump past that and be like, hey, that's so trite, that's so basic, what's the real secret sauce? Like what's really going to change my life?
Right.
And there've been plenty of times over the years where I've just sat with a guy and it'd be like, he'll say his next phrase of what he's struggling with, God loves you. And then he'll say his next thing, God loves you. And then it'd be like, but why does God love you? God loves you. It's just, and sometimes it's just like, you need that mantra over and over and over again. It's like, I think about it this way, Jake, there's only one element in nature that will always win if given enough time, and that's water. And the Bible talks about being washed with the water of the word. And I think there's a sense in which the word that we need to hear more than anything is God loves you. And it's like, let that drip and drip and drip and drip. And given enough time, and if you're in the right environments, what we like to call grace-based environments, where you can keep wrestling, you can keep pondering, you can keep struggling, but you're just going to hear that God loves you, God loves you, God loves you. And it's not because you earn anything. It's not because you perform to the certain level. It's just like by his own will, he says, I love you. And I mean, I'll admit that's what's changed my life. That's what's radically transformed my life, because by no means am I a perfect man in my life now. Praise God, I'm not bound by any of those addictive behaviors anymore, but it certainly doesn't mean I'm perfect. And so I need that message just as much today as I needed 25 plus years ago when my journey started. But it's the message we all need over and over and over again.
Yeah. It's ongoing. It's an ongoing journey. It's not a one and done, like, I get sober and then I can go back to the rest of my life. It's
right.
Just one day at a time. So good. One of the things that you share, and kind of wrapping up before too long here, I wanted to ask about this transformation pathway. Okay, heal, grow, share. What does each of these phases look like in real life for someone who's been stuck in porn or sexual addiction?
Yeah. So, we have this kind of model that we call the transformation pathway. And we invite anybody who's come into our ministry to kind of step onto that path. So whether it's a man who's in recovery from unwanted behaviors, or let's say a wife that's going betrayal, trauma healing, or, anybody. And it's a very simple 3-stage pathway, and it's heal, grow, share. And it's not linear. So you can kind of come in at any point. I will say that generally speaking, the foundation is going to be healing. Nobody typically comes in and says, oh, I've done all my healing work and so I can get busy with growth or whatever. It's like, no, usually, like we talked about earlier, there's a lot of stuff from childhood that just gets buried with just life and rhythms. And we need take some time to realize there could still be some unhealed wounds. There could be some unforgiveness in your life. There could be some of these things that need deep healing. Maybe there's trauma, abuse, whatever it may be from your past. And so healing lays the foundation of an understanding of grace and the worth of you and your recovery, whatever that needs to look like. And so healing is taking a deep dive and a look at those areas of your life and soul that need healing. And a lot of this then does lay that foundation for what we call identity work. Like, healing is really about coming to a place where you have a clear understanding of who you are and your worth. You're not really going to get to be able to experience growth and sharing if you don't have this sense of, my goodness, I'm beloved. I'm worth this journey. Like God has said, I'm worth going on this journey of love and recovery. And so then growth is really about starting to understand what are the ways in which I need to live life differently. And growth is never done. In fact, we like to say that growth is the mission. So if which is sometimes difficult for guys to get their head around, because they're like, no, you got to tell me like in 2 years I'm going to be done with this. Like, well, that may be true according to, let's say, sobriety definitions or whatever. meaning like, okay, you're never going to act out in those ways again, possibly. But goodness, growth, when you talk about that relationally, emotionally, all kinds of other ways, spiritually, growth is ongoing. And then what is the ultimate purpose of that healing and growth is so that I can then share. I can invite other people onto this transformation pathway, wherever they may be. And sharing is as simple as having a story to tell. Like just being able to say, what are the steps and missteps that I've taken on this journey that would maybe benefit someone else who also needs that transformation pathway. We also like to say that, again, it's not a linear journey. It's more of like, it's kind of like thinking you're going on a hike in a national forest, and there might be lots of trails, and you might be in a section of trail where you're going, I'm working on healing right now. And sometimes that can feel like you're going in circles. That's okay. Just keep moving, and then eventually you might be like, you're kind of in the growth area. And then you know what, there might be some point in your life where you go, a new wound just happened. Because guess what? We still get hurt as adults, right?
Yeah.
So I need to go back through the healing process. So a lot of this is about learning a lot of the principles and the practices in each of those areas of what does it look like to heal in terms of emotionally and sometimes relationally, where maybe there's forgiveness needed. And then growth. What does it look like to grow and mature emotionally, spiritually, relationally? And then how do I share that with others? And what we found is when people have a little bit of that kind of directional language, especially for men, it can help them feel like, okay, I'm actually able to kind of see the mile markers and see the progress that I'm making. Because sometimes if it stays too nebulous of the idea of like, just get better, it's like, wait a second. What's the next step? Like, I need to know what's the next step I need to take. And we use that language a lot. We're here to help people take their next best step to recovery and wholeness in Christ. And so wherever they are on that pathway, we want to help them assess that and then take their next best step.
Yes, so good. I do want to round out with this, maybe one question, maybe two, I'm debating. But I do want to hear what you have to say on this. I have a lot of spouses that listen to this podcast, and they're, they have kids and they're going through their struggles, trying to figure out how do I best support my spouse? What do I do for myself? Right. And so you talk about grace with boundaries. What does that actually look like, especially when trust has been broken over and over again?
Yeah. So like I mentioned before, grace by definition doesn't exist without a standard, right? It's an undeserved kindness. So even when, let's say there's a marriage where there's been betrayal by the husband and the wife is navigating that trauma healing, first of all, it's very important that both of them are getting the individual care that they need for their particular healing journey that they have. Mm-hmm. And then there's opportunity and need for what's going to go on in the marriage. But one of those key elements is, if they're working towards restoration, is that there does need to be boundaries. And the boundaries need to be established and primarily for the sake of the one who has felt the betrayal trauma. So the degree to which that individual, that spouse, feels safe is where those boundaries need to be placed. With the understanding that as you go through this healing and recovery journey, there can be modifications and adjustments made to those boundaries as one goes forward. That does not negate the reality of grace in that process. In fact, I would actually argue that healthy boundaries are a grace. It is because what that spouse is saying is the grace that I'm giving you is that I want to remain connected to you in this relationship. Mm. Guess what, husband who is betrayed? You don't deserve that. Mm. That is a grace. The boundaries then are a grace because she's saying, and this is where I will feel safest in being able to remain in connection with you. And so the husband that's betrayed needs to be able to receive that as a grace and what? Have gratitude grow. Thank you for still wanting to be part of my life after I have so grossly hurt you in the ways that I've hurt you. There needs to be that humility. And so grace is not opposed to boundaries. Grace is, in fact, I'd say in many ways, grace is, and it can be expressed through boundaries. And then as you navigate whatever that healing looks like, then you can have assessments on where those boundaries maybe can be adjusted and changed. The whole time, I want to encourage the
Yes.
husbands in those scenarios to definitely um, be focused on humility and gratitude, and certainly be intentional about what you are doing in your own recovery. The best healing that can occur is you getting busy about being a different man in your recovery. Like, go on that healing journey of becoming a man of integrity. No longer be disintegrated. Become a man of integrity that is whole throughout. Your life is in the light.
I love it. So good. I think we'll wrap up with this question, Jonathan, and then you can tell people where they can find you and work with you. If someone is kind of in this discipline only model, white knuckling it, or I need to willpower my way through, this is the approach we can easily and naturally take, especially in, if we're part of Western culture today. So what are a couple of simple things they can do, or would you suggest they adjust in order to begin living on this grace model instead?
Yeah, this may sound counter to what I've said all the way through, but I'll explain it. Men, if you have been engaging in secret addictive behavior, I mean, you've got a full-blown addiction going on, recovery will be the hardest thing you will ever do. Recovery will require the greatest amount of effort that you have ever exerted. And they might say, wait a second, where's the grace-based approach there?
Grace? Right.
I love this quote from Dallas Willard. He was a spiritual formation guy, and he says, grace is not opposed to effort, it's opposed to earning. So understand the difference there. You are going to have to work your butt off. I mean, I've worked my butt off in recovery. I mean, it is hard work.
Mm-hmm.
But if any of that work is saying, I'm doing this in order to perform and earn points, I'm doing this to earn like the accolades of other guys in my group, I'm doing this because I think I'm earning God's love, then your motivation is wrong. You will still have to do all of that work. Boundaries are necessary. You got to work hard. You got to resist temptation. You got to put yourself in scenarios where you can win when it comes to recovery and sobriety. But go there knowing, you know what? My life is a gift. Grace means that God is saying my very existence is worth being. And he's saying, I'm worth this journey of transformation so that I don't have to live in this junk anymore. I don't have to live in this addiction anymore. And so if you can start to have that sense of worth grow, not because you've earned anything or because somehow your recovery is going well and therefore you sort of deserve, sobriety, you're going to be completely different in terms of your attitude around all of the hard work that you're going to have to do. You're not doing it to try to like strive for earning. You're doing it because you're going, God, thank you that you didn't strike me dead. Thank you that I still have life. Thank you for the resources and the tools and the environments that are available for me to actually get help. So gratitude grows, and you'll work your butt off in a different way. You'll work your butt off with a smile on your face rather than just like, drudgery or just the idea of still those shame lies ringing in your head. So I don't know if that helps, but that's kind of the way I would approach it in terms of understanding it's the different motivation that you have towards your work that grace makes a difference.
Yes, and I think it's, I like to say to guys, they're like, okay, well, how much of the effort is mine? How much of the effort is God's? Where is this balance? And I say, you have agency. You are using that agency to make choices, and God is with you every step of the way, the whole way, right? You do it through His grace, but you have to be the one to put the effort in. It's you're acting alongside God. You're doing it together.
And also then ask yourself, where did that agency come from?
Right.
Is not that also a gift from God? Like, wow, okay,
Sure.
so it's still grace. So even my very will to make choices is a gift from God. So again, it all goes back to that idea of like, am I willing to acknowledge the gift of grace? Am I willing to have that humility to say, yeah, I'm not going to try to take credit for this because it really all boils down to God's undeserved kindness in my life. And that's what we mean by a grace-based approach.
Yeah. And that integrates right back with psychology, right? What a powerful way to view life and myself and recovery. It empowers me in every way to view life that way. It's very good.
Absolutely.
So, Jonathan, if somebody wants to work with you, get in touch with you, where should they go?
Yeah, our website is it's bebroken.org. And so we have all of our resources there for men, for wives, for families, and churches. Those are our 4 main ministry areas.
Perfect. And I know we didn't touch on the churches today, but I know you have so much that you do in that area. So excellent resources there. And we'll put that in the show notes and make sure people can connect with you. So thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on, Jonathan. Such a privilege. And I think this will help a lot of guys. So thank you.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to No More Desire. It's a genuine blessing for me to do the work that I do, and I wouldn't be able to do it without you, my listeners, so thank you. If you've enjoyed today's episode, do me a favor. Follow this podcast, hit the notification bell, and shoot me a rating. The more people who do this, the more men this podcast will reach. So take a few minutes of your time and hit those buttons. And if you want to take your sobriety to the next level, check out my free workshop, The 8 Keys to Lose Your Desire for Porn, or my free ebook, The 10 Tools to Conquer Cravings. These are specialized pieces of content that will give you practical exercises and applied solutions to overcome porn addiction. And you can find them at nomordesire.com. As a listener of the No More Desire podcast, you are part of a worldwide movement of men who are breaking free of porn to live more impactful, meaningful, and selfless lives. So keep learning, keep growing, and keep building that recovery mindset and lifestyle. God bless. Everything expressed on the No More Desire podcast are the opinions of the host and participants, and is for informational and educational purposes only. This podcast should not be considered mental health therapy or as a substitute thereof. It is strongly recommended that you seek out the clinical guidance of a qualified mental health professional. If you're experiencing thoughts of suicide, self-harm, or a desire to harm others, please dial 911 or go to your nearest emergency room.